It was a typical Monday morning in the small town of Millbrook, Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knew your name and most people had been born within a mile radius. But on this particular day, everything changed for David Mercer. David was a 42-year-old insurance adjuster with a modest life, a devoted wife named Laura, and two teenage children, Emily and James. He lived in a quiet neighborhood, worked at the same office since college, and rarely strayed far from home. That morning, after dropping the kids off at school, he parked his car at the back of his workplace and got out to stretch his legs before heading inside. As he walked toward the building, something caught his eye near the curb, a black leather wallet lying in the gravel. It looked expensive, embossed with initials that read M.E. David bent down, picked it up, and opened it. Inside were several credit cards, a driver's license under the name Michael Evans, and a stack of cash, $500 in 50s. There was also a photo tucked into the back pocket of the wallet, a woman smiling warmly, her hair curled, wearing a white dress. No name was written beneath it, but the expression in her eyes told David one thing. This was important. He took the wallet to the front desk, handed it over to the receptionist, and went about his day. But the image of the woman stayed with him. Something about her face felt familiar. Later that evening, while scrolling through social media, David typed in Michael Evans and found a profile. The man was a real estate agent who lived just a few towns over, and the woman in the photo? Her name was Sarah Carter. David didn't know why, but a strange sense of unease settled in his gut. That night he showed the photo to Laura. She studied it carefully and then said, "I think I've seen her before. Maybe at the grocery store last week?" David nodded, not sure what to make of it. But as they went to bed, neither of them could shake the feeling that something about this wallet would change their lives forever. The next morning, David received a call from the police station. They had returned the wallet to Michael Evans, but when they tried to reach him, his phone had been disconnected and his house was empty. No sign of him or his family. It wasn't until later that day that the news broke. Michael Evans was missing, and so was Sarah Carter. And somewhere deep inside, David began to wonder if he had just stumbled onto something far more dangerous than he ever imagined. The next morning, the Millbrook Police Department received a missing persons report from Michael Evans and his wife, Sarah. It was an unusual case. Both were described as responsible adults with no known history of running away or mental health issues. The only lead they had was the wallet found by David Mercer. Detective Angela Hayes, a seasoned investigator with over 20 years on the force, was assigned to the case. Known for her calm demeanor and sharp instincts, she had solved some of the most complex cases in the county. She started by visiting the location where the wallet was found, a gravel lot behind the insurance office on Maple Street. She took photos, collected tire marks, and spoke to the receptionist who had received it. David Mercer was called in for questioning that afternoon. He arrived at the station in a clean button-down shirt and slacks, looking nervous but cooperative. Detective Hayes sat across from him, studying his face as he recounted the story of finding the wallet, turning it in, and later seeing the photo online. She asked about the woman in the picture. "Do you know who she is?" she pressed. "I don't think so," David said, "but my wife thought she looked familiar." Hayes made a note. "Did you keep the photo?" "No," David replied quickly. "I didn't even take a screenshot. I just saw it once." She nodded slowly. "And what did you do after you saw it?" "I went to bed," he said. That's it. Hayes wasn't convinced. There was something off about his answers. Too rehearsed, too clean. She decided to run a background check on David Mercer. What she found was unremarkable. No criminal record, no debts, no suspicious activity. But when she cross-referenced his social media accounts, something caught her eye. There were several recent posts from Laura Mercer, tagged at the same grocery store where Sarah Carter had supposedly been seen. A few months earlier, there had been a viral post of a couple arguing in aisle 6 of the same store. One of the faces was blurred, but the other was clear enough to be identified as David Mercer. The argument was intense, loud, and ended with one of them storming out. The caption read, "Marriage is hard work." Detective Hayes printed the image and showed it to the officers working the case. "This man looks like he was holding a phone," she said. "Maybe taking a video. maybe gathering evidence. She then reached out to the local real estate office where Michael Evans worked. His co-workers described him as a friendly, family-oriented man. He often brought his daughter cupcakes after closing time. No one knew anything about a fight or a problem. In fact, they were all shocked to hear he was missing. Meanwhile, Hayes also visited the house where Michael and Sarah lived. The front door was locked, but the back window was slightly ajar. Inside, the place was eerily tidy. No signs of a struggle, no forced entry, just empty. As she walked through the rooms, something struck her. In the living room, a framed photo hung on the wall. It was of Michael and Sarah smiling together. But something was wrong. Their eyes didn't quite meet. They weren't looking at each other. They were looking past each other. It was as if they were pretending to be happy. Detective Hayes left the house with more questions than answers. Something about this case didn't feel right, and for the first time in years, she felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just a missing persons case. It was something else, something darker, and she was determined to find out what. Detective Hayes knew she needed more than just circumstantial evidence. She began digging deeper into the personal lives of Michael and Sarah Evans, starting with their financial records. What she found was troubling. Michael's bank account showed a sudden drop in income 2 months prior to his disappearance. His real estate commissions had slowed dramatically, and he had taken out a large loan from a private lender, $40,000, with an exorbitant interest rate. There were also several unexplained withdrawals from his wife's account, all made within a week before they vanished. Hayes cross-referenced these transactions with David Mercer's finances and found something even stranger. A month before finding the wallet, David had deposited a large sum of money, $25,000, into his savings account. The source of the deposit was unknown, but it coincided with the exact time Michael's loan was approved. This wasn't just a missing persons case anymore. It was looking like a financial dispute, one that could have led to something far worse. Meanwhile, Hayes decided to visit Sarah Carter's workplace. She worked as a part-time librarian at the Millbrook Public Library. The staff described her as quiet, kind, and always smiling. But when asked about her relationship with Michael, they hesitated. She seemed distant lately, one coworker said, like something was on her mind. Another added, "I heard her talking on the phone once." She sounded upset, like she was trying to get help. The only person who could confirm this was the library's security guard, who had overheard part of a conversation between Sarah and someone else. He didn't recognize the voice, but he remembered the words clearly. "You don't have a choice now. Either you go quietly or we do it the hard way." That was enough for Hayes. She filed a warrant and requested access to the library's surveillance footage from the day in question. After hours of reviewing video, she found the moment Sarah was speaking on the phone. The man standing behind her was not Michael. He was a tall, clean-cut man in a dark coat. David Mercer. It was a chilling discovery. Back at the station, Hayes pulled up every known photo of David and compared them to the man in the footage. The resemblance was undeniable. He had changed his posture slightly, kept his face half-turned, but there was no mistaking the build, the walk, the subtle mannerisms. She then turned her attention to Laura Mercer. If David was involved in some sort of scheme, she wanted to know how much Laura knew, and if she was a willing participant or a victim herself. She visited the Mercer home under the pretense of a routine interview. Laura greeted her politely, offering coffee and asking after her family, but Hayes noticed the tension in her eyes. She was nervous, not just about the questions, but about something else entirely. As they sat in the living room, Hayes casually brought up the missing couple. "Do you remember seeing Sarah Carter anywhere recently?" she asked. Laura hesitated. "I think I saw her at the grocery store last week. That's what I told my husband." "And did you ever talk to her?" "Number, I just saw her from a distance." Hayes pressed gently. "Did you ever consider that maybe she recognized you too?" Laura froze. Her hands tightened around the mug. "What are you saying, detective?" "I'm saying that sometimes people see things they don't want to admit they've seen," Hayes said carefully. "And sometimes those things lead to trouble." Laura didn't answer, but the silence spoke volumes. As Hayes left the house, she felt a shift in the case. This was no longer about a lost wallet or a missing couple. It was about something far more personal, something rooted in jealousy, greed, and betrayal. And somewhere deep in the heart of Millbrook, a secret was waiting to be uncovered. Detective Hayes knew she was close to the truth, but she needed more than just circumstantial evidence. She needed a motive, and that meant digging into the Mercer family's past. She started by requesting access to David and Laura's marital records. What she found surprised her. Their marriage had been on shaky ground for years. There were multiple instances of domestic disputes reported to the police, none violent enough to warrant arrest, but enough to raise red flags. The most recent incident had occurred just weeks before Michael and Sarah went missing. According to the report, David had called in a false emergency claiming he was being attacked by his wife. When officers arrived, they found no signs of injury or struggle. Laura, however, had visible red marks on her neck and wrists. She refused to press charges, citing marital problems. Hayes also reviewed their social media activity again with a new perspective. This time, she noticed something else. David had been following Sarah Carter online for months. He liked her posts, commented under photos of her smiling at community events, and even shared a post about her volunteering at the library. Laura, on the other hand, had blocked Sarah 2 days before the wallet was found. It wasn't jealousy, it was obsession. The deeper Hayes dug, the clearer the picture became. David Mercer had not only discovered the Evans through the wallet, but he had already known about them long before. And it wasn't love that had drawn him to them, it was resentment. Michael Evans had once been a friend of David's from college. They had bonded over real estate and investments. But when Michael opened his own agency, he began outperforming David in both sales and client satisfaction. That had always burned in David's chest. But what really pushed him over the edge was the fact that Michael had married a woman who looked like a younger version of Laura, only prettier, more confident, and less burdened by life. He saw in Sarah everything he thought Laura should be. And worse, he believed Michael had stolen her. The next step was to bring in David for a second round of questioning, this time with a warrant for possible obstruction of justice and tampering with evidence. Hayes wanted to see how he would react now that she had concrete proof of his involvement. When David arrived at the station, he was flanked by a lawyer and looked visibly shaken. He sat down, hands clasped in front of him, eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route. Hayes placed a file in front of him and slid a photo across the table. It was the surveillance image from the library, the one showing David standing behind Sarah, speaking in hushed tones. "Do you know who this is?" she asked calmly. David didn't look at the photo. "I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do," Hayes said. "You've been following Michael and Sarah for weeks. You took that wallet, saw the photo, and then started digging. You even showed it to your wife." David's jaw tightened. "We didn't do anything wrong. Then why did you deposit $25,000 right after Michael got that loan?" Silence. Hayes leaned forward. "You weren't just looking for them. You were trying to find out where they lived, maybe even how much money they had. And I'm starting to believe that you wanted to take something from them." David's face turned pale. "That's not true. Then tell me the truth," Hayes said. "Where are they?" For the first time, David cracked. His shoulders slumped, and he stared at the photo as if seeing it for the first time. "I don't know," he whispered. "I just wanted to scare them, to make them leave town. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." But Hayes knew better. Something had gone very wrong, and the trail of evidence led to one place, David's home. She filed a search warrant immediately. What she found inside would change everything. Detective Hayes knew she was on the edge of a major breakthrough. Every clue, every financial transaction, every hidden comment or blocked account pointed to one conclusion. David Mercer wasn't just involved in this case. He had been planning something for months. She began by reviewing the Mercer family's history in depth. Their marriage, once stable, had deteriorated over time. Public records showed multiple domestic disturbance calls, none violent enough to warrant an arrest, but enough to suggest a pattern of emotional abuse. The most recent incident had occurred just weeks before Michael and Sarah went missing. In that report, David claimed he was being attacked by his wife, but when officers arrived, they found no signs of struggle. Laura, however, had faint bruises on her neck and wrists. When asked if she wanted to press charges, Laura declined, saying it was just a fight. But Hayes suspected it was far more than that. Digging into their social media profiles again, Hayes noticed something disturbing. David had been following Sarah Carter for months. He liked her posts, commented under photos where she smiled at community events, and even shared a post about her volunteering at the library. Laura, on the other hand, had blocked Sarah 2 days before the wallet was found. This wasn't jealousy, it was obsession. The deeper Hayes dug, the clearer the picture became. David hadn't just discovered the Evans through the wallet. He already knew about them. And it wasn't love that had drawn him to them, it was resentment. Michael Evans had once been a friend from college. They had bonded over real estate and investments. But when Michael opened his own agency, he began outperforming David in both sales and client satisfaction. That had always burned in David's chest. But what really pushed him over the edge was the fact that Michael had married a woman who looked like a younger version of Laura, only prettier, more confident, and less burdened by life. He saw in Sarah everything he thought Laura should be. And worse, he believed Michael had stolen her. Now armed with this new understanding, Hayes decided it was time to bring David in for a second round of questioning, this time with a warrant for possible obstruction of justice and tampering with evidence. When David arrived at the station, he was flanked by a lawyer and looked visibly shaken. He sat down, hands clasped in front of him, eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route. Hayes placed a file in front of him and slid a photo across the table. It was the surveillance image from the library, the one showing David standing behind Sarah, speaking in hushed tones. "Do you know who this is?" she asked calmly. David didn't look at the photo. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do," Hayes said. "You've been following Michael and Sarah for weeks. You took that wallet, saw the photo, and then started digging. You even showed it to your wife." David's jaw tightened. "We didn't do anything wrong. Then why did you deposit $25,000 right after Michael got that loan?" Silence. Hayes leaned forward. "You weren't just looking for them. You were trying to find out where they lived, maybe even how much money they had. And I'm starting to believe that you wanted to take something from them." David's face turned pale. "That's not true." "Then tell me the truth," Hayes said. "Where are they?" For the first time, David cracked. His shoulders slumped, and he stared at the photo as if seeing it for the first time. "I don't know," he whispered. "I just wanted to scare them, to make them leave town. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." But Hayes knew better. Something had gone very wrong, and the trail of evidence led to one place, David's home. She filed a search warrant immediately. What she found inside would change everything. The warrant was signed by the judge at 9:17 a.m. on a cold Thursday morning. Detective Hayes, accompanied by 2 uniformed officers and a forensic technician, arrived at the Mercer home just before noon. The house, a modest 2-story in a quiet neighborhood, had been untouched since the previous evening when Laura had left for work. As they approached the front door, Hayes could feel the weight of the case pressing down on her. Every step closer to that house brought her closer to the truth, and possibly to something she wasn't ready to see. Laura answered the door in a bathrobe, her face pale and drawn. She didn't protest as the officers entered, but her eyes darted nervously from one person to another. The house was eerily quiet. No children's toys scattered about, no signs of recent activity, just an unsettling stillness. Hayes led the team upstairs first. They began with the bedrooms. In David's room, nothing seemed out of place. Neatly made bed, clean clothes hanging in the closet. But it was in the basement that things took a turn. The basement stairs creaked underfoot as they descended. It was dimly lit, with only a single overhead bulb flickering intermittently. The air was damp and smelled faintly of mildew. As the forensic tech turned on his flashlight, Hayes saw what looked like a small storage area tucked behind a stack of old boxes. Inside there were tools, wrenches, hammers, a crowbar. Nothing unusual at first glance. But then she noticed something else. A small metal box sitting on a shelf, slightly ajar. Inside were documents, loan agreements, property titles, and personal letters addressed to Michael and Sarah Evans. One letter caught her attention immediately. It was written in a hurried hand, filled with anger and desperation. It read, "You think you can take everything from me? You took my job, my respect, even my family. I'm not going to let you take anything else. If you walk away now, maybe we can all pretend this never happened. But if you don't, Well, you know where I live. It was unsigned, but Hayes had seen enough to know whose handwriting it was. David's. The team continued searching. In a corner of the basement, they found a sealed duffel bag. Inside were several items, clothing, toiletries, and a folded map of the surrounding countryside. There was also a .38 caliber revolver, its serial number filed off. It wasn't registered to anyone in the state, but the most chilling discovery came from the floorboards near the back wall. When the forensic tech pried them up, he found a shallow cavity. Inside were two pairs of shoes, one male, one female, and a small leather-bound journal belonging to Sarah Carter. The pages inside were filled with entries dated over the past few weeks. The last entry, written in shaky handwriting, stopped the breath in Hayes's chest. I tried to get help. I told someone. Now I'm scared. He knows where we are. I think he's coming. Please, if anyone finds this, tell the police. There was no date after that line, just a blank page. Hayes felt her stomach tighten. This wasn't just a missing persons case anymore. This was murder. She radioed for backup and for the coroner. Then, without saying a word, she climbed back up the stairs. Laura was waiting at the top, standing frozen in the hallway. Her eyes met Hayes's and she gasped. "What did you find?" she whispered. Hayes didn't answer. She simply handed her the journal. And as Laura flipped through the pages, the silence between them became heavier than ever before. The basement was now a crime scene, sealed off with yellow tape and guarded by uniformed officers. Inside the house, Laura Mercer sat on the living room couch, clutching the journal in her hands like it might break if she squeezed too hard. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She didn't cry. She just stared at the pages as if trying to make sense of what they revealed. Detective Hayes sat across from her, notebook open but not writing. She had seen this before. People who thought they were hiding behind silence, who believed that staying quiet would protect them. But sometimes the truth spoke for itself. "Do you know where Michael and Sarah are?" Hayes asked gently. Laura looked up, blinking slowly. I don't know," she whispered. Hayes studied her carefully. "You blocked Sarah on social media. You saw her at the grocery store and didn't say anything. You knew David had been following her." Laura's fingers curled around the edge of the journal. "He wasn't following her. He was just curious. Curious about what? That she looked like you? That he thought Michael stole something from him?" Laura didn't answer. She looked away toward the hallway leading to the basement. "You knew," Hayes said quietly. "You knew something was going to happen." Laura finally met Hayes' eyes. "We were having problems. A lot of problems. He was angry all the time. He blamed me for everything. For not being enough. For not looking like her. For not being the perfect wife." Her voice cracked. "And then he found that wallet. It was like fate. Like the universe handed him an excuse." Hayes leaned forward. "Where are they, Laura?" Laura closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, there was no defiance left in them, only fear. "I don't know exactly," she said, "but I think I can help." 2 hours later, Detective Hayes and a team of officers arrived at an abandoned farmhouse on the outskirts of Millbrook. The property had been vacant for years, its windows boarded up, its fields overgrown with weeds. The GPS coordinates came from the folded map found in the duffel bag. David had marked a location near the old Evans family home, which had long since been sold. Inside the farmhouse, the air was thick with dust and decay. The first floor was empty except for a single bed in the corner of the main room. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, no bodies. But upstairs, in a small attic space hidden behind a false wall, they found what they were looking for. Michael Evans was dead, lying face down on the cold concrete floor. His body showed signs of blunt force trauma to the head and neck. A crowbar lay beside him, still slick with dried blood. Sarah Carter was alive, but barely. She was bound to a chair, her wrist raw and bleeding, her lips swollen from what appeared to be forced feeding or gagging. She was conscious but barely aware of the world around her. As the paramedics worked to stabilize her, Hayes stepped outside to call for backup and forensic support. This was no longer just a missing persons case. This was murder, and someone had almost succeeded in covering it up forever. Back at the station, Laura gave a full statement. She admitted that David had planned the attack after seeing the photo of Sarah. At first, it had only been harassment, stalking, threats, even showing the photo to her in secret, hoping she would see how much better life could be without Michael. But when Michael began threatening to report David to his superiors, things escalated. David had confronted him, demanding money and threatening to expose their financial secrets. When Michael refused, he disappeared. Laura said she never wanted anyone to get hurt, but when she realized what David had done, when she found out about the bruises on Michael's body and the blood-stained tools in the basement, she tried to stop him. She begged him to let Sarah go. But David wouldn't listen. He said she was the reason we weren't happy, Laura said through tears. That if he couldn't have her, no one could. Now, with Sarah alive and Michael dead, the case was complete. But for Hayes, the real work was just beginning. Because justice wasn't just about finding the truth. It was about making sure no one else had to live in the shadows of a man like David Mercer ever again. The courtroom was packed on the day of the trial. The small, modest courtroom in Millbrook had never seen a case like this before. So many lives intertwined, so much grief and betrayal exposed under the cold light of justice. Detective Angela Hayes sat in the front row, her notebook open but untouched. She had done her job. Now it was up to the jury to decide what kind of man David Mercer truly was. David stood at the defense table, flanked by his lawyer. His face was pale, eyes sunken, and he looked like a man who had lost everything. Not just his freedom, but his identity. Beside him, Laura sat quietly, dressed in a plain black dress. She had pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice and aiding in the cover-up, but not murder. Her tears were quiet, her sorrow real. Sarah Carter, still recovering from the trauma of being held captive, sat with her family in the gallery. Her face was bruised and swollen, but her eyes showed strength. She had given a victim impact statement that brought even the judge to silence. "I don't hate him," she said, her voice trembling. "I used to think I did, but now I just feel sad. For me, for Michael, for the people who let this happen. He took my husband, nearly took my life, and changed mine forever." Michael's parents sat beside her, their faces lined with grief. They had lost their son, and there would be no bringing him back. But they also knew that without Detective Hayes, without the courage of Sarah and Laura, the truth might have been buried forever. The trial lasted 3 days. The prosecution presented every piece of evidence: the surveillance footage, the journal, the financial records, the blood-stained crowbar. The defense argued that David was mentally unstable, that his actions were the result of a breakdown, not premeditated murder. But the jury saw through that. After only 2 hours of deliberation, the verdict was read. David Mercer was found guilty of first-degree murder. The sentence came swiftly: life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the judge read the words aloud, David stared straight ahead, his hands shaking. There was no outburst, no last-minute plea, just silence. Laura received 7 years for her role in obstructing the investigation. Though she would eventually be released, the weight of what she had done would follow her for the rest of her life. As the doors of the courthouse closed behind them, Detective Hayes stood outside for a moment, watching the rain fall. It was over. The case that had started with a simple wallet had ended in tragedy, but not without resolution. She thought about the people involved: Michael and Sarah, whose love had been stolen; David, whose jealousy had destroyed a family; Laura, who had been both a victim and a participant; and herself, who had spent weeks chasing shadows, piecing together a puzzle that could have easily gone unsolved. Justice had been served, but not all wounds heal. Some remain, deep and unspoken, carried by those who survive. Later that evening, as the town of Millbrook returned to its quiet rhythm, Hayes sat at her desk, writing a final report. On the wall behind her, a framed photo of her late husband reminded her why she became a detective in the first place. She folded the paper and placed it in an envelope labeled "Case Closed, Mercer v. Evans, Star." Then, with one last glance at the file, she closed it. And for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to breathe. Because some cases end in murder, but not all end in darkness.